I will never show anyone this DVD. The production value, immaculate.
Just crumble on stage, like mid-set. I've watched bands have full-on breakdowns.
Not the good kind either.
Not the one that puts my feet in the air. No,
Yeah.
by no means.
No.
A lot of times these breakdowns are like, they're like, oh my God, like stop the set.
Nobody should have given me a microphone.
What's going on, Internet? Welcome back to the URL versus IRL podcast. I am your host, Bree Lynch, and we're in a new space today, but we're going to be talking to some familiar faces that you guys have seen on the podcast before. First off and foremost, welcome to the new studio. Really excited to be here today. And today we're going to be having a nice, chill, little laid-back conversation. I'm going to be talking to two of my very good friends about being in a band and being musicians. So let's roll the intro music and then get into it. Josh and Will, welcome back to the podcast.
Hello.
Sorry, babe, I didn't mean to say to my good friends, you're my boyfriend.
I got demoted
Damn.
in
You
an,
just found out right now?
in
That's
an
wild.
intro. I just found out I got broken up with
Damn.
as soon as I got introed. I was like, babe, you want to come be on the podcast? I said, yeah, babe, sure.
I hope
Oh,
you guys
thank you
are on
so
good
much. I
terms.
love you so much. My two friends.
My two friends.
I did not mean to do that to you. I'm so sorry.
Wow.
I don't know what it is. I think it's just we're in a
Crazy.
brand new space and like my brain is like trying so hard to focus, and the fact that you're producing this episode is so off for me right now because I'm so used to having all the stuff.
Scuff.
My one very good friend and my roommate.
Can you imagine I do a whole new podcast studio in our house and then I'm like, by the way, I'm breaking up with you.
By the way.
My one friend and my acquaintance.
My acquaintance. Anyways, I wanted to talk to you two about being in a band and just being musicians because I feel like this was an idea for an episode that I had a long time ago and I just never got around to doing that with the two of you yet.
Yeah.
So I wanted to talk to both of you about that because you guys have both been musicians for how long?
It is a defining personality trait of mine, I will say.
I think it is for most musicians.
know
like,
me for that, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, the funny thing is I think if you looked back at younger Josh, you would be like, yeah, that guy loves music and all he
That
talks
guy?
about is music.
I can attest to that, yes.
As an adult, I'm a little more, I'm not super private with it, but I'm a lot more like quiet about it.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
my like professional life. So when I do tell people I'm like, oh yeah, I'm in a band or I play in bands and I like go to concerts and everything, they're like, wait, okay, you gave me that vibe, but like, you actually do? And I was like, yeah, I like play like little concerts every now and then. They were like, holy shit.
They're like,
That's
I
actu-
never would have guessed with the tattoos and the piercings and the veganism and all
and
that.
and the emo vibe. Both of you
and
wearing
the-
all black
and
is
the
so
skinny
on par.
jeans. Oh my god, yeah, me wearing a Counterparts sweatshirt, which I've probably worn in a past episode, which I should have thought more of before airing this episode. But,
No, it's
yeah,
okay.
you know.
Honestly, this one was like super last minute, and you guys were both going to be here today. And I was like, "Hey, are y'all busy? You guys want to do this or what?"
I am not.
So, how long have you guys both been playing music?
Since 7th grade, I think. So I was 14, I think.
Damn.
So it's almost 20 years.
How does that feel to say that out loud? Have you done that math
I
recently?
mean, it's great for the musician thing.
Yeah.
The 20 years of doing something just really drives that nail in that I'm getting old. I was like, damn, I never really thought I'd be doing a singular thing for 20 years other than like breathing and pooping, but here we are. No, it feels good. You know, I feel like it's something like any hobby that has
Yeah.
its ups and downs confidence-wise.
yeah.
And I feel pretty okay right now, you know? I feel pretty good.
How
Nice
long have
neutral.
Yeah, right? How long have you
Yeah.
been playing music again, Josh?
I have been playing music also since I was in the 7th grade. So
Wow.
I was wow.
It's like you guys are twins or
Oh
something.
my god.
Will is my like musical adjacent by all means.
Yeah.
By all means.
Just adjacent? That's like
you're
being
my
your roommate
you're
or
my
whatever.
musical
I'm your musical roommate.
Will is my musical soulmate.
Yeah.
I like
How's that? Do you like
That's
that
nice.
one?
That's cool.
I love me some Will.
All right, now you're getting a little clingy. Let's
Take it down a
let's
notch.
take it down.
Did I just get broken up with again?
Yes, you did.
What?
It's all happening on the podcast. We've got
so
3
yeah,
cameras.
We're not
I
even
know.
15 minutes
We're
in.
not-
Wow, brutal.
Am I
dude.
ever gonna tell anyone how long I've been playing music for? Fuck no.
I'm sorry.
Never. No, so since I was in 7th grade, so when I was 12 years old, I'm gonna be 29 soon.
29?
And so
29?
I'm gonna be 29
29?
soon. And so yeah, it's been 17 years. And that's weird. Just like 20 years.
I was gonna say if you were 12 in 7th grade, I know I started a year late. Then I was probably 13 in 7th grade, so I think it has been 20 years.
An actual 20 years. Congratulations,
actually,
Will. You're
that-
I
like a
didn't
little-
know it
that
till
would
right
make-
now.
that makes a lot of sense because I turned 13 in my 7th grade.
Oh yeah, because you're January 28th.
29?
29?
29?
Yeah.
28.
Oh,
I'm
shit.
kidding. The one day.
I'll leave.
I'm not
That's
a
fine.
birthday diva, but
I am.
But yeah. So I've been playing for the better half of 17 years, and it's definitely music is funny because it really gives you like a weird sense of a time warp. Like
Yeah.
even the songs that I grew up listening to, I swore I'd be listening to those songs forever. And here I am, even like 17 years later, and listening back to some of those same albums. Like before coming into this podcast, I've been sitting here humming and or thoroughly quietly singing Silverstein songs, and those songs carry out 20 to 25 years in age. So
You know
I'm
what I
like,
listened to the other day? I listened to No Hope by The Color Morale front to back without crying for one of the first times in my life.
Damn.
incredible album,
I know.
incredible choice. Glad you mentioned that's a nice favorite.
That's a sick one.
We love The Color Morale.
Yeah, for real.
That's
If
a
you're ever
great
feeling
band.
depressed, put that album on for sure. That's a good one. But you guys have both been in multiple bands together, so I kind of wanted to talk to you guys about like what that is even like, because I think that like being in a band is like something that a lot of kids want when they're like growing up, and then now I feel like it's like an adult like position to be in that's like kind of weird because like that's something that a lot of people wanted when they were kids.
Yeah, I think
It is a very childish dream that we should have grown
I don't
out
think
of.
it's like
oh my god,
so not what I meant.
That's so wild that you said that.
put those foolish ambitions to rest. Yo,
Great reference.
put those
Any
foolish
Elden Ring fans out
ambitions-
there?
If you're an Elden Ring fan, put your foolish ambitions to rest.
Oh, that's so funny.
Put that music shit back where it fucking came from. No, I'm kidding. No, it was definitely, I mean, it has its stages. I think when you start writing music, there's a infancy, juvenile stage that it has no matter what age you start. But like when you were like our age when we started, it was a totally different realm. I mean, and I didn't even start playing in like small town concert, like even any kind of concert venue until I was 16. That was like the first time 15, border 15, 16. And like, that was the first time I even had to be like in front of people, like playing music. And that made me want to like shit my pants. So it's surreal to like look back at that, see that, and like think to myself, like, whoa, I really wanted this. I really wanted to be a musician at this time. And I carried that for so many years. I mean, nowadays I have my own separate profession, but I still play music very regularly. Will and I are in a band together, and like we still play music regularly.
Yeah,
So-
you guys have been in a couple bands together. Do you guys remember what it was like your first time you were ever on stage?
I'm trying to think.
Or your first time playing in front of other people?
Terrifying.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I mean, that's a good word for it. Yeah, I used to have this awful habit. Not so like I would be nervous beforehand, and then you get a couple songs in, and you're like, okay. But then I used to have this horrible habit for years. After shows, that's when I was the worst, because I would get off stage and I'd be like, did I sound good? To like any of my loved ones who would listen, to the point where they were like, dude, you need to shut up. Like,
Yeah.
it's bad. I still ask every once in a while, like if I think the thing that has changed is not so much the anxiety of it, is more so like I know now when I've had a bad show, and it's not me asking another person, it's me being like, I fucking suck tonight. Like that was awful.
Yeah.
I was not on my A game. But I think the other thing that has really changed is just being comfortable enough to be like present in that moment rather than just kind of going into, I mean, there's still a bit of like, you know, when people talk about flow state and stuff, it's like, yeah, I'm vibing and I'm, you know, doing my thing and I'm not really thinking about it, but I'm able to enjoy it a little more. And there's less of that anxiety of like, oh my God, did I sound good? Because it's like, even if I didn't, you know, like I'm doing it because I love it, not, you know, like obviously I want people to think I'm talented because I worked really hard on this thing that I do. But it's less about that, I guess, especially as I mature.
Yeah.
If that's happening at all, but you know.
If that's happening at all.
There's no way to like, I think there's a maturing process when it comes to like writing music or like a song or like playing with specific artists in mind, but like there's no way for you to like, there's no way for it to just mature out of the stage of playing music. I think like everyone plays, Paul McCartney is still playing music. And the man is so old. I love him, but he's been playing for so many years, and like, no one's batting an eye thinking, put it to rest. I mean, some people probably are like, put it to rest, Grandpa, because like people say that about Metallica, which is, I get it. I think it's a funny joke, but it's like they're still great.
Yeah.
Why are you harping on them so hard? But I agree. It's been with Will and I playing in Tether, I think I'm glad I was able to grow accustomed to like lesser anxieties as time went on. I think I originally used to fear playing in front of people and just being in front of people. That was like, I hated that. Because I wanted to do good, but it was just like the eye contact that people were making with me just made me feel so uncomfortable. It wasn't really until after I got.
I mean, you were the front man, so like it's expected.
If anybody's looking anywhere,
well, so
It's you until Will's guitar solo comes up.
So believe it or not, like when I was in Tether, like there was no stage fright. I think the worst anxieties I would have about that would be when I started playing guitar for Tether, when I started doing the rhythm guitar.
Yeah.
I think I grew anxiety about things that could go wrong with my instrument in any capacity. I had anxiety about some of the places we played at because I was worried about anyone maybe accidentally taking my gear or like shit going missing. I had more anxiety about the logistics of the show versus playing in front of people. Now I feel like I have an affinity for that. I feel like that's what I want out of that. And it like gives me the most insane amount of euphoria being able to do that instead of growing anxiety, I think is like the best way I could put it.
You know, something that I do want to talk to both of you about is the fact that like when you're in a band, you have to deal with so many different people and like so many different personalities. I think that's something people probably don't realize. And the only reason that I can even say that I realize this is because I'm dating somebody that's in a band and I've dated people that have been in bands. So like, well, not people, but just you multiple times. You've been in so many different bands.
I've been in so many different bands and I just want them to all be successful.
I know.
It's hard because it's like before I'll let you get to your question. I'll only be short. I promise. But like, it's hard because sometimes because you're talking on the topic of like conflicting personalities, it's unfortunate because sometimes people swayed away from bands or swayed away from projects they're working on because there's such a conflict in like working with other people, and then they end up pursuing their own things, either whether that be a solo project or some other kind of like other musical anomaly that they end up trying to do. But it's weird because you just want them to be bigger, but sometimes it's in your control and sometimes it's not. But a lot of times it's hard when it's based on the people you're working with. So continue. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, for me as a person, I have a hard time working in groups personally. Like I think I always take like this weird like leadership kind of controlling role because I have such a hard time working with groups. So, I mean, I was in a band for like literally 20 seconds when I was younger because I did play guitar and I was a lead guitarist for like a second. But I think that like I just can't imagine actually having to deal with a band dynamic and like having 5 people, most of the time all men. Generally speaking, it's a lot of guys. All trying to come to like a singular decision and like figure out how the heck you guys are even doing that. And I think something also that people probably don't notice is that a lot of the times with bands starting, a lot of people are strangers with each other, and it's not just like, oh, this like 5 group of musicians that have known each other for years decided to like start a band.
Yeah.
How do you guys like, I don't know, I guess deal with different band dynamics? Because you guys have been in multiple bands together now at this point.
I've had like, I guess, any number of different band dynamics. I mean, like my music career started, the first exposure I had to even playing with other people, really, other than, I would say, like the 2 people in my life that were most important to me in my music, like me choosing like music as my thing for the longest time, were my uncle, who played guitar and introduced me to it, got me like a lot of my first gear to really encourage me to stay with it. He had me learn a song and play it with him in his like very successful at the time like cover band that played out around where he lived.
Oh
So,
shit,
like,
that was your intro?
I think that was, if not my first show, one of my first ones where I was performing in front of people in like a quote unquote band. If not that, it would be when the spot that I used to take lessons at, which my buddy Rob also used to. So like a lot of times when people ask, you know, how long I've been in music, who I've been playing with, like I've been playing with Rob like since I picked up a guitar pretty much.
Wow.
He and I used to take lessons at this place called Music Wizard, and that no longer exists. Literally right down the street from the house I grew up in. So we would take lessons there, and then like twice a year they would have like a recital. They called it Wizard Palooza, which was great. But they'd have us just do cover sets, and they'd put us with other kids who were taking lessons there. And so like Rob and I think played a couple songs together, but I also got paired with other people because he was playing guitar and then he switched to bass. And then especially when we started talking about a band outside of the music store, he and I, with our, at that time it was like middle school into high school friends, Claire and Eric, put together like my first DIY like band. And like our first gig in our own band was at that music store. Like
Nice.
the teachers at the store threw together an Ozzy cover set, and they needed
I
an
love
opener, and
Oh, God.
we were like, we'll do it.
I feel like playing covers has to be so terrifying because like the other people know the song, so like
Oh,
if you fuck
yeah.
it up, they know.
Well, it was funny because they were playing all covers and we were playing all of our originals. Which,
Okay, sick.
So I mentioned my uncle,
Yeah.
Dennis. He was very involved in a lot of my early music stuff, and he recorded the entire performance. I still have it on DVD, but I will not show it to anyone because it is very
I need it
middle
for the
school
podcast.
music.
I'm gonna run it. While
No,
we're...
we're that. So help me God, we'll never see the light of day again. Where I'm looking at this camera.
Camera again, that one right there.
I will never show anyone this DVD. The production value, immaculate. My aunt and uncle did a great job, but I was a middle school child. Nobody should have given me a microphone. Thank you.
Hey man, at least you didn't play the intro to Crazy Train poorly, mind you, at your 8th grade talent show.
No.
Followed up with Sweet Child of Mine
Oh,
intro poorly.
poorly.
Along with an Escape the Fate riff
Those
that
songs
no
are
one
basically
ever
the
knew.
same.
Like no one at that 8th grade talent show was gonna know this riff. They were and then I literally topped it off with like another opening to Thunderstruck.
Yeah.
I was like,
Thunderstruck
look at
was
the cool thing I
yeah.
can do on my guitar. Never knew how
You
to
didn't
play
have
the full
Smoke
song.
on the Water in there?
No, I wanted people to know I was cool. Smoke on the Water was like, what?
Smoke on the Water is like the first thing that everyone learns.
I feel like
Yeah.
somebody would have
Literally.
been cheering, or they would have shouted "Play Freebird" or something fucking crazy, or Freebird or Blackbird, one of the Bird songs, any
Yeah.
of them, you know.
We had a song with a Freebird-esque solo in it, which was hilarious because we were like a skate punk band.
That's so funny.
But I was like, I want to play guitar solos.
I remember the
Will- I was
first time I
about to
learned
say
how to play
Will.
Blackbird, I
Yeah.
was like, I'm gonna kill something. Like, I was like, I'm about to throw this fucking guitar. I was like, one of the first songs that I learned how to play was Blackbird, and I was just
Not a fun song.
no.
Brie had to sit there watching me have an existential crisis trying to learn Neon on acoustic guitar.
Oh my god.
Especially because I know the song too. I was like, that ain't,
I
that's
literally,
not it.
I was doing this
wrong.
one thing. I was doing this one thing, and for the viewers and listeners, musicians tend to, like, when they write music, if they don't read music very well, they tend to like just make noises and then try to replicate the noises on the instruments. So like, I literally was sitting there playing it, and I'm like trying to think of how the song sounded in my head. I'm like, bow, da, bow, bow.
Yeah.
And I'm like, bow, da, bow, bow. Oh. Okay. Bow, da, bow, 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 bow. And I'm like, okay, so it should sound like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I had like this little app called Songster that I like try out every now and then.
Yeah, we love Songster.
And it's fun.
Shout
I
out
don't-
to Songster.
I-
Sponsor the episode.
Because a lot of times I learn songs best by watching the other guitarists, like the shape of their hands and everything like that, or just being able to listen to it sometimes really helps if I've played similar chords before in the past. But yeah, I was using Songster and I was like listening and I was just sitting there making the sounds like. And Brie had to literally sit there watching me do this for like over and over again. She goes, that song, is that Neon? And I was like, yeah, it's Neon. She
Yeah.
goes, that's not how it sounds. I was like, oh, I know. That's not how it sounds.
Were you a tablature guitar player?
I
Did
was a
you
tabs
have
kid,
tabs?
yeah.
I
Yeah.
was a tablature guitar player.
I
Not
hated tabs.
off topic.
That was the only way I learned anything.
Off topic, like I never had a music teacher growing up. Like I taught
See-
myself guitar completely from ground roots. So,
That's
like,
really interesting because I had a guitar teacher when I was learning how to play guitar originally.
Yeah.
And then I remember you and I were dating at the time. And I was like, you've never taken lessons? And then, like, also the fact that, like, you don't read music, like, confidently is another thing that I feel like a lot of people probably wouldn't imagine could even be so. But, like, I don't know. Can you guys elaborate on that?
It really just, I feel like it really becomes relevant in more of a professional setting.
Yeah.
Because
yeah.
I think I can speak for both of us when I say like most of our, if not all of our experiences in the DIY realm. But like not one person I've ever gone into a band situation with has handed me a piece of music and
Yeah.
been like, this is what I want you to play.
Yeah.
If anything, it's like stuff that's already recorded or demoed out in some way, or they'll send me videos if they want something specific. Otherwise,
Yeah.
it's just like I used to work with a friend of mine from around that time, like middle school, high school, and then we've reconnected. He produces beats and does his own songs, and he asked me to put some guitar stuff on it. So even that, at the bare minimum, is just like, hey, this is the idea I have, kind of have a vibe. He would give me like maybe an example of a song or artist that he was going for and ask me to just give him something similar.
Yeah.
But that's been my experience for the
Yeah,
most part.
I every band I've played for never really required me to understand music to a T. There have been some projects where, like, one of my first bands, I played in this one band that was more of the hardcore genre called Provenance growing up. And when we started, we had a drummer who was really, really talented and well rehearsed, and still is very talented in music in every kind of facet you can think of. And they really, really wanted each member of the band to like know how to write in music, like write their music and read their music all like on actual like music paper. And like me sitting there like, where are the numbers? Where's the ones and fours and
Where's the
like
ones and
fives and
fours?
fives and zeros and tens and sixes and like and I was like gonna have like a
Yeah.
mental fucking freak out. And like that I only ran into that instance in the early iterations of music when we were trying to like really cover things. But the older I became, it was less reliant on needing to know. I think it's important for musicians to have
Yeah.
general understandings, but it like of needing to know, like I wasn't really shackled to like that kind of music creation. Thankfully, I was able to stick with tabs, and even when I was in my early iteration band Provenance, our one guitarist, the way he wrote music was insane. He used to use this like program that would write stuff out in tabs, and he used to basically program the songs in tab form. That way everyone in the band was able to read it in tab form, and then he would just write the guitars that way, and it would replicate and play the guitars the way we'd want them to sound. And then he would just MIDI out the drums, and he would write an entire song like that and just present it to us and be like, I think you guys should play this. And we'd be like, you got it. It would literally sound phenomenal. And I just, that portion of how the music writing, every band's different. Every band,
and that I feel like what your old guitarist used to do would be the like kind of position that I feel like that I would have, because like I said, I don't work well in groups, and I'm always like, I have to like take control of something somehow in order for things to get done. Do you guys feel like with each different band that you've been in that you have to play a different role?
I feel like I've definitely
depends on who you work with.
In certain bands been pushed into a leadership role, and then I've had a similar feeling in other bands when I haven't been in that role. I'm like, this is weird, but not bad, if that makes sense. Just having less responsibility. Like I've been in a couple bands where it wasn't really like my band,
right?
But you know, I am contributing. It's just I'm not like holding the reins, which especially now, that is kind of the ideal situation. Whereas before I had the same kind of, one might even call it a control freak kind of mindset, where it was like, you know, I don't trust other people to make these kinds of decisions, so I'm going to do it even though I might not be the person to do this, you know?
Right.
So I've definitely gotten into more comfortable territory where it's, you know, I do the parts of music that I enjoy, which is showing up, writing, collaborating. You know, I despise booking shows.
Yeah, you were a big booking guy in one of your previous bands. I was going to actually ask you to touch on that lightly, because I feel like that's another thing that people probably don't realize is that you guys, when you don't have managers and stuff.
Will is a godsend is basically how that
Will
conversation could
was
go.
like the band's dad.
When we were in Tether, just to inject real quick, like Will took that role on very well. It was a painstaking process, and a lot of times when him and I would like go back and forth about specific show offers or anything like that, whether it was a couple that I would get versus like the amount he would follow up on email, Instagram, like all the different platforms, like it's just incredible. It was just incredible how he handled it. He handled it gracefully, even though I know for a fact he wanted to rip his hair from his scalp.
I'm sure. I mean, and I only remember because I was so involved with helping you with even the social media, because I was like, Will is literally doing everything, and someone needs to help him.
A workhorse.
So I was like,
I know.
if it's me, then it's me.
The thing with, I mean, it's kind of a blanket thing with dealing with people for any type of situation, is just trying to find a compatible form of communication.
Yeah.
Whether it be literally how you're reaching out to somebody, whether it be for a gig opportunity or to hire somebody for an opportunity, or like to pitch your music to someone, is like, how does this person expect to be talked to? How does this person respond to people? Like, are you guys going to agree, find some middle ground? Because it's, I mean, the biggest thing with booking is just the expectations on either end.
Yeah.
Because if a certain, like if I was in a band reaching out to a venue that the venue person feels they have no business playing here, you're not afforded a, sorry, no, that date's booked or whatever, even a courtesy, just like, nah, we're busy that day. Even people just won't get back to you, and it may not even necessarily be like, oh, they just don't care to respond to you. Sometimes it is, but a lot of times it's just like that person is getting flooded with shit on top of all, like this is a second or third job for them that they probably took on as like a passion project, and then they're like, oh god, I'm kind of like in charge of the scene in my city now, like I need to, you know, look at all these emails and these Instagram messages.
Yeah.
And the thing that's funny with how it's kind of changed is I used to always hear when we were younger, like, oh, you need like a press kit or something, or at least like good live photos, and you can like mail them a CD or like direct them to where they can find you online, which in those days, if you couldn't get music online, it's like, I mean, Bandcamp has been around for a while. I think most of the time that I've been a musician, but not like 20 years.
Right.
Yeah.
So like, you know, we were giving out CDs and sending them to people, and then maybe or maybe not getting responses. But I think the biggest thing is just that, at least for me, and I feel like I've heard this from other people, is just the frustration you feel when you don't get an answer back, because it's like you're so passionate about this thing, and somebody else not getting back to you. At least for me, automatically in my head, I was like, well, I guess I suck then. Like,
Yeah.
you know, it is kind of a bummer, but
Yeah.
you also, as you mature, learn to take the opportunities you're given and, you know, really show that, like, take pride with that rather than worrying about the opportunities you weren't given.
Yeah.
Because that kind of shit can drive you wild. Especially, I feel like there's such a sense, and I was so guilty of it when I was younger, and I feel like a lot of young musicians are, where you feel like you're owed a certain amount just because of how passionate you are about it, even if you're not, one, not nearly as good as you think you are.
Right.
Which I feel like there are a lot of people who fall into that category.
Yeah.
Because there's definitely an in crowd in certain scenes. Like, there are people who get by because they know a certain person. You know, those are the people putting in the work a lot of the times. Those are the people who go home from their job and practice for 4 to 5 hours a night and then do the same thing every day. Like, when I first started, I used to be like that.
Right.
But, you know, to consistently keep doing that and putting in the work and be passionate about selling yourself and show up to do that every day. And I'm like, I'm 33. I don't have time for that shit anymore.
Yeah.
I know there are a lot of musicians who are that age or older who still have that, but like I feel like my trajectory has changed, and I would call it more of a realistic expectation of like where I'm at as a musician and where my goals sit. Whereas when I was a kid just starting out, I was like, you know, I want to play the Trocadero or,
Yeah.
you know, like, which,
The Troc.
you
I
know,
actually do have a question. Do you guys run into the issue where like maybe you want something more than another band member does? You guys like run into a problem of like different levels of passion and seriousness and that kind of thing?
That's been an ongoing. That's always going to be an ongoing issue in music, because there are a lot of musicians who, and there's no fault in it. Like, if you're a musician, you're a musician. Do it however you want. But there are a lot of run-ins with bands sometimes where some musicians start out like a small band and then the sound is just that good and they develop into something bigger, and then they're like, guys, I can't make that kind of commitment.
Yeah.
And it's happened. It's a big run-in that bands run into a lot of times, and I mean, you just have to kind of go with it. Yeah, you depending on this, and Will was mentioning like certain scenes having certain kind of attachments to each other, because it's a lot of times who you know and how you know them and what you can offer them and vice versa. And I think it's very easy when you get to that point, or when you get at least to a comfort point, like a good sweet spot in knowing certain people in certain scenes and developing a certain style, or developing even a specific name for yourself, no matter how much time it takes, can really lead you into a good direction of like what musicians to find, or even to fill in for certain bands. I've been in a few bands where we've changed the members consistently. Even some of them, what I feel is like the anchor members of bands, like a drummer.
I was
you
going to
know?
ask, like, how does it feel different when you have to swap out members versus when it's all original members? Or
would
like, have
say
you
so.
been a brand new member where you're like, ooh, I don't really know these people like that? Like, do you feel
I
like
think that always happens. It's just an organic process of the music process. Every musician has a completely different style. Sonically, I think Will and I play very great together.
guys
However,
do, yeah.
Will is a lefty musician. I'm a
I'm
writing
left-handed. That's just the only difference.
I'm a left-handed musician. We both have different strum patterns, and
Yeah.
the way we handle and configure those strum patterns. Not saying one is better or lesser than the other. It's just we both play very differently sonically, and one of us definitely has more experience than the other. I personally think Will has way more experience than me and has no business playing with me. But it's
Okay.
great. It's great to like be able to do that and see like how differently we are, but how similar. It's like a polar similar situation. I've mentioned in probably other episodes where I just think that that's what we have. And I think many musicians run into that. They incorporate a new member and there's a polar similar situation or just a slight familiarity with how they play, but it's different. It's always going to get different. And it's just an organic process of the musicianship.
Yeah. Speaking of things that are probably different for everyone, I know how you guys' writing process goes, but could you guys like talk about that a little bit? Like how like for somebody that's never even been around musicians before, it's probably like, how the hell do you even start writing a song, especially with like 4 other people?
I think for every band I've been in, it's been slightly different. And that's kind of the beautiful thing about music, like going back to the whole, like, I guess, music theory conversation of, you know, do you guys write music? Do you like tabs? Do you like this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like the cool part about it is kind of finding that middle ground with everybody's experience because it's like, yeah, maybe I can't read it on the page, but like you and I can talk about it and get to the same spot where we're like, oh, okay, we can play this song together, you know? And I think like it's very cool when you can find it in the room, but that doesn't always happen. Like it's kind of hard to just like build something out of nothing.
Yeah, I would
And I
imagine
mean,
so.
I feel like there's always at least some like baseline, like, okay, I had this idea to bring to the table, even if it's just like, oh, I had this riff. Like, what do you guys think of this? Can we expand on it? And then another person's like, oh, well, what about this with that? And then you start putting the pieces together.
Yeah.
And I mean, we had an experience recently where we were jamming with some friends, and I think in an hour and a half,
An
2
hour and a
hours,
half,
we
we
felt like we had
Yeah, what
pretty
you
at
guys
least
put
half
together
of a
was
song.
crazy.
half of a song, and we put together half of a song. I have a full set of lyrics for it, even because I was just writing away just for funsies, and it actually sounds like I was impressed. I was very impressed, and it's not fully fleshed out by any means because it was a one take situation, but yeah, it's fun. Like you run into that situation, and I think I would love to encourage more musicians to not feel so insecure and so self-conscious stepping into a musical project of any sorts not having anything because the music writing process, like Will said, is absolutely like ambiguous. It's just anybody can join a project, and sometimes there are members of this band that take a huge leadership role. And I mean, look at like Bruce Springsteen. The band itself is named after the guy, and he is going to take that vital leadership role.
I mean, you would hope so. Yeah.
You would hope so, and I would hope so too, but there's going to be like a certain level of it where there's going to be a member that takes a certain leadership role in the writing process, or like, I came with this idea, how do you want to flesh this out? Or there might be a few members who are like, yeah, you know, we usually just bounce back and forth off of each other. A lot of times in bands, it's the most common to see drummers and bassists get together and they've been flinging ideas with each other, and they just have that really tight rhythm that every band or musician needs to have as a backbone for any song, just a good rhythm.
It's so funny to think of that because I think that as a non-musician now, I think in my brain, the way that like when I look at a band, I think what most people would probably assume happens is like the front man is like the leader and they like have a set of lyrics and they bring it to the band, and then the guitarist comes up with something, and then the bassist and the drummer. And so I think that because of the way that bands are positioned on stage, people think it works from front to back, but a lot of the times it doesn't actually work like that.
It's an absolute musical schema and social schema because bands interchange members so often.
Some frontmen don't even go to practice. Like,
Yeah,
some frontmen don't even go to band practice.
and not even that. It's like there's so many bands where the roles change all the time. I mean,
Yeah.
I've even seen bands, and I won't name names, but I and not for any specific reason, but I've seen bands live where the most amazing thing happens, where the members will just switch in the middle of a set,
Yeah,
and they'll
that's
just
so cool.
rotate.
That's
and
so
it's
cool.
it's the fucking coolest thing I've ever seen, and they
Yeah.
sound so good still switching. And I'm like, the level of practice that must take to get that good and that tight in that situation
Yeah.
is just, it's got to be incredible. But yeah, I mean, it's a lot. There's so much you could even go into that topic that
I know.
we just don't even have the time for. But
gonna
that's
say,
definitely
If you can pull it off, it's great.
Yeah.
If you can't, please stop.
yeah.
Because
That's a definite notion too.
I've seen bands who cannot do that.
Yeah.
and you will watch
And
them.
probably shouldn't.
Yep.
Jesus
funny-
Christmas. I'm so sorry
It's
this
okay.
happened again.
No, it's all good.
I put my phone on Do Not Disturb. It's still disturbing me.
It's because it's an alarm. That's why.
It sure is.
And
turning that
funny enough, those same bands, you will watch those same bands just crumble on stage like mid set. I've watched bands have full on breakdowns.
Not the good kind either.
Imagine them just.
And not the good kind. And not the good kind. Not the one that puts my feet in the air. No,
Yeah.
by no means.
No.
A lot of times these breakdowns are like, they're like, oh my God, like stop the set. I've even watched bands where they restarted the song mid set and I'm like, whoa,
Yeah.
that's shocking that you can do that.
You know, I feel like that also probably comes back to like a form of communication, which is also where I think about like the writing process and band dynamics and everything like that. Because even Josh and I trying to communicate to create music for the podcast, like
Yeah.
between the intro and the
Yeah.
outro, like I feel
Was
so
difficult.
bad for you. I used the word sparkle recently when I was talking about music. Like I was like, I don't know, I want like a little like sparkly, like something. And Josh was like,
little twinkly,
Just a
sparkly.
yeah, it's like twinkly,
certain je
sparkly.
ne sais
You
quoi.
know what I'm
Certain-
saying? Yeah, and like you were like sparkly, and I was like, yes.
But I was able to find
Chimes.
the sweet spot she wanted because
Yeah.
I've embedded myself in music for so many years and I've been able to hear different sounds. Thank God I like am multifaceted with like genres because that's
Yeah.
another thing that musicians do. They tend to do is pigeonhole themselves on genres and they don't draw inspiration from anything. I think
I know.
as a guitarist, vocalist, and amateur drummer, because I've only been playing drums for genuinely like a better half of a year and a half to 2 years. One of the best pieces of advice I received from my brother Jared, who is a vocalist, is learn to draw the inspiration or learn to draw the vocal strength and the vocal ability from different genres because they all have a certain flair to them
Yeah.
that make them special in that domain.
Yeah.
And just the way, I don't know if it was verbatim how they put it, but like just saying it that way or putting it into that scope was able to allow me to see the bigger picture. Like, oh my God, like if I want to be a better singer, I think the only way I'm going to be able to do that is to be able to draw inspiration from other sources. Even screaming, I have to be able to draw lyrically. I have to be able to draw inspiration from other sources. Some of the most happy, somber, or melancholic songs can come from any kind of genre, and I think it's imperative to not pigeonhole yourself
Absolutely.
to one specific genre.
Yeah.
And I think it's important for artists to really seek out where it's great for artists to get out of a good comfort zone. You need to be uncomfortable.
Speaking of pigeonholing yourself, I feel like there's a weird little thing happening in the music scene now where there's like internet bands, people that are just playing online and only putting music out digitally. How do you guys feel like social media has affected even being in a band from back in the day when you guys didn't have to worry about that to now?
I like it.
Yeah.
I like it a lot more.
No,
I like it a lot more. I think it has its pros and cons, but I like
Yeah.
it a lot more.
I feel like the big thing that I started like getting into and kind of playing around with the idea of just because I liked seeing other people that did it. And it was just like a content consumption thing for me, was like the idea of the YouTube musician who isn't even necessarily like the central focus of their page isn't even necessarily like, hey, listen to my band.
Right.
I think a good example of a creator who does that is Adam Neely. He's a bass player in like multiple projects. A lot of stuff that's more like jazz heavy because he talks a lot of music theory. He's classically trained, but he talks a lot about his experience as like a gigging college musician in New York, or like gigging with his own bands now, having I think been out of school for a while, and just as either a bass player for like a regular bass player for a band, or a fill-in player, or even just in DIY bands in general, and talking about the music experience but also the theory behind it. And like it kind of goes the range of like super music nerdy to like everyday music nerd type of stuff, which I think is really cool. I think TikTok is another huge one, especially with short form. I feel like TikTok leans a lot more into the like, hey, I only have 30 seconds, go listen to my band, but like they'll do something creative with it to get your attention and bring it to that.
I just figured it's probably a whole nother layer now that you have to deal with being in a band rather than not having to think about it
but
at
also
all.
Some people can make a whole career with music without even necessarily having to go on stage at this point. And even like more behind the scenes people in music, like session players, can have their own YouTube personality, which supplements that either income, A, or B, also just brings attention to like, hey, this is what this is actually like, which is kind of cool because you didn't used to see a lot of that side of things.
Right.
Or even just like another big thing, because everybody with hobbies has their tech and their stuff that they really like, is just the tech side of music, getting into pedals and different amps. Like anytime I need to look up, I'm like, oh, I'm thinking about buying this thing that I can't afford. Let me look at other people who've played and demoed it out and like done
it's
everything
like, oh,
with
great,
it.
I have to sell a liver if I want to get the fucking a tube screamer. Yeah.
I mean, yeah. But then you have the person who has played every single iteration of the Tube Screamer, and they do a shootout, and then exactly which Tube Screamer you want to go with.
Yeah, literally.
Because they all sound
literally
slightly different.
Yes.
To a T.
I can relate with camera equipment for sure. Yeah.
It's like you don't know how they are different, but they're different.
But they're different. You can tell,
And genuinely, and musicians would know. I mean, I'm so happy you brought up, like, still talking about social media interactions. I'm happy you brought up income, because, like, even though to be a musician is to be and to experience the lifestyle of like a starving artist, let's say that, right? You're going to inherit that role. However, social media has been able to apply a very an amazing like gateway and cast a much wider net for musicians to make an income. And a lot of times, like Will was saying earlier, sometimes not even having to step out of your house. And inherently, sometimes these musicians end up taking a back seat and taking the producer role. I mean, you see specific artists like Charlie Puth. Charlie Puth is a wonderful musician who has hit songs out there, but also decided in many aspects more than not to just take a complete back seat and said, wow, wait, I have perfect pitch. First off, he does. Second off, he can play just near damn any instrument and even emulate those instruments off of a MIDI pad if he doesn't want to use the real instrument. And he has an archive of instruments. But he found more of a love in creating the music rather than being the performer. And sometimes musicians, they like that backseat role. They don't care. One of my favorite musicians is Johnny Marr. Johnny Marr has played with a plethora and has written for a plethora of artists. And he has played for, when I was growing up, one of my favorite bands, the Smiths. And they would have been lost without his unique sound. I feel like when you hear his guitar style, you can genuinely know it's him. Genuinely, I feel you know it's him. And I just don't think it can be mistaken. Another good guitarist was George Harrison. Has a very unique style. Paul McCartney even, he started out predominantly as a bassist, but very trained in piano and guitar. And you can just, with certain musicians, you can just tell they just have a certain flair with them. And it can come in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I think you guys have a certain flair. I'm very excited for this
Thank
new
you.
project that you guys are
Certain
starting.
Thank
Je ne sais
you.
quoi.
Yeah.
Certain je ne sais quoi. I knew it.
One last question that I kind of wanted to ask you guys is, how do you feel like being a musician has affected your relationships?
I think on a both intimate relationship and friendship standpoint, it can put a strain. I mean, with you and I, it definitely does to a certain degree, but nothing that I feel has been unbearable and not manageable. I mean, thankfully, I haven't had to go on like month-long tours or anything crazy like that to where you've had to not have the ability to see me or talk to me or do anything because I've had to play like these crazy amounts of shows, but we've had instances where I've had to play a decent amount of shows and it's like it's been hard because we have our regular lives, and also it's just been hard with our interpersonal relationships with friends and family because I'm either going to have to spend a lot of time writing music to get it down or a lot of time playing the songs and writing the songs in order to master what it sounds like.
I'm personally never bothered by it. So, like, I mean, honestly, like, if you want to air our shit out, go for it. I'm not, like, offended by it, and I'm not worried about it. But, like,
I mean, if you want to get into it right now.
No,
No,
but
I
seriously,
don't
like,
have anything insanely negative to say. There are cons.
I'm curious to hear what they are from you, though, because personally, for me, I'm not bothered by it, and I never really, like, think, like, super deep into it. Aside from, like, sometimes if you have band practice super late, then I'm kind of like, oh my God, I haven't seen you all day from work, and then now you have to come home for 20 seconds to grab your guitar, and then you leave, and then you know what I mean? But that's really, like...
It's the dedication to time. That's all I was gonna say. It's because when we talk about priorities, it's like, well, I have there's a difference, but there's a distinction between like almost like a priority and an obligation, and it's like I kind of lump the two and cluster the two together sometimes because it's like sometimes my priority is to meet this obligation as a musician a lot of times, and when you're so passionate about something, you're almost blinded. Like you can't. It's almost like seeing red.
Yeah.
You just can't see anything else. You just want to fulfill this obligation and meet that priority in your life. And I know it's hard because there's other priorities. You need to have a social life. You need to have the intimacy if you have a partner. But sometimes we run into those issues where we can't always meet it. And I think that's all I was really going to say. Really, there's no other cons. I think it has a con in the relationship, but it's not anything that's unbearable.
I mean, well, that's interesting to hear, but if you're self-conscious about that, just know that it's a self-conscious thing, and I'm not actually observing it from my point of view and my perspective.
If
it makes you feel any better.
Truly, if I was self-conscious about it, I feel like I wouldn't have even aired it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have even said anything about it.
I mean,
I'd probably be telling you to cut it out.
But I feel like I'm saying to you, if you feel like that's like a conflict sometime, just know it's an internal conflict for you, and I'm not actually observing that as your partner, so I have no problem
that's good.
with it.
What about
but I was
you?
just curious. What about you, Will?
What about you?
I think because I've never really been away from home strictly because of music for longer than like a week. There's, you miss each other, but it's kind of a realistic thing of like, I'm doing this because I like it. So like, it's not like, oh, I'm away at war,
Right.
Yeah.
I think the interesting thing is because mine and my partner's personality are kind of different. Like I'm not like an extrovert by any means, but I can, I like to be around other people. I kind of like the show environment for the most part. Sometimes I get really overstimulated and I like to just find a dark corner to sit in.
Yeah.
Like I've had a couple shows, especially recently, like, go up, perform, do the thing, because it's a lot of hurry up and wait. Then once all that is over, it's like, okay, I can relax. Especially when you talk about a situation where it's like, okay, I got off work and now I have to be here by a certain time. I'm rushing and then I have to get all my cables out and do this whole thing. And then you finally just have a second to sit. And then you're like, oh my God, there are like 25 to 30 people just around me right now. I feel like my partner just doesn't care for that environment at all. Like for them, sometimes 5 people is too many in a room. So like the only like I would say conflict would be a very heavy word
Yeah.
for it, is there have been some shows where, you know, I've wanted them to come out, but they don't feel comfortable, but I don't push it because I know what their mindset is going into it, that like even just the idea of being in some of these rooms is like, nah,
Too much.
yeah.
Right.
So when it's too much from the get-go, but it's like a really important show, like we've had talks about it. I you know, I stress to say arguments because that would be a heavy word for it, but you know, we've talked about it a couple times, like, oh, this is really important to me. Like, you think you could come out? And they're like, yeah, I'll be there. But then as soon as you're done, I'm going home.
Yes.
So I'm like,
Yeah.
because we, in our early relationship, you know, we would do the thing where it's like, oh, do you want to come with me? And then they start realizing how much downtime there is in between the exciting part of the night.
Yeah.
Which is playing, and then you know you're loading in 3 to 4 hours before. Sometimes
Yeah.
you're
Yeah, they're
sitting around,
extremely
you know.
long days
Yeah.
for sure.
Like Brie has even told me sometimes where she's like, "Oh, sometimes I'm just so happy I haven't had to shoot you guys, or I just didn't even have to go to the show." And I'm like, I totally understand. Sometimes I'm there and I don't even want to be there, but
Yeah.
it's not for lack of like not wanting to play with my friends and not wanting to like. No, it's not even for that. It's just sometimes especially when you're our age, like you're exhausted. You're just tired.
Yeah.
The mundanity of life, it just gets to you, and you just want to kind of just like take a nap.
Yeah.
Take a nap. Yeah.
Because
wanna
it
take a nap.
speaks to how great the feeling is of being on stage,
Yeah,
is the
yeah.
amount of stupid bullshit that you do just in preparation
To
to
get
do
on
the
stage.
thing.
Yeah.
And like how much money you put into it, how much time you put into it, even not on a show day.
Yeah.
Just for that like 30-minute fix, you know?
Yeah, I was even gonna say, as far as like how much thought has to go into being in a band and being a musician, and like just probably the band drama and the stresses that come with that sometimes. And I was wondering if you guys like get bothered by that bleeding into probably your relationships, or like if that ever brings you enough stress that you're like, why am I even fucking doing this shit anymore? You know what I mean? Because I think
Yeah.
even sometimes for myself with the podcast, even like when I have like a job coming up specifically and I'm going to be out of town or whatever, and then I start having to think about this and how many things I have to film prior and all that other kind of stuff, or like how much of my week it actually takes up just for something to come out on Tuesday, and I'm very excited for it too.
Yeah.
Like, or just to finally reach the finished product, how much work actually has to go into it for me to get to that point. And I was wondering if it was ever the same thing for you guys, because I know this bleeds into my relationship even with you, because I do this every single day,
every
all
single
week.
day.
Yeah.
And it does. I think inherently anything you're passionate about will always bleed in. So yes, I think it does, and sometimes for better, and sometimes for not better. And it just depends on a circumstance, like what it is. If there's drama in the band, maybe that drama might carry out because the members adjacently are talking about it, or the person's offloading it to their partner, and it's basically no matter what. And musicians or people, listen to me. If you're wanting to get into a band, you need to treat it like it's like a second job at that point. Because if you're gonna work with other musicians, I think there's gonna be a certain level of like transparency, obligation, expectation. You just have to kind of meet.
Probably vulnerability too, I would assume.
Always. There's always vulnerable. I mean, even when I write lyrics or do anything around that nature and have to show it to people, and like it's like my most innermost, deepest thoughts, and like there's nothing more vulnerable than having to be a lyricist and put yourself on there. If you're a lyricist that doesn't try to really put a lot of meaning behind your lyrics, no fault to you. That's amazing, especially if you can get really creative with it. But if you're a lyricist who really puts your heart on your sleeve, and I'm talking your whole heart, that can cut deep, and that can be the most vulnerable it can ever be. I mean, it just depends on what you're writing about. The most vulnerable I've been was like opening up about my father's death immediately after the death, and like writing about it so shortly after that. And like that's the most vulnerable you can get as a musician, is just putting your heart on your sleeve and telling people what's on your mind and really how you truly feel, and not telling people that in person. You know, just putting that into words and then conveying that message in a song is it's pretty interesting.
I mean, I'm sure even outside of lyricism, because obviously that has to be terrifying. But I think even outside of lyricism, I would assume that it's probably super vulnerable to even like show your bandmates what you just came up with, or like that you have an idea, or that you want to go a certain direction, or like try a certain riff and hope that they like it, and they're not like, I don't like that.
Totally.
You know what I mean? Like, I'm sure that there's so many moments that you have to not take things personally, and then every single time you get on stage, it's vulnerable, because like if you mess it up, then you're in a vulnerable position, or like, you know, just playing your music for people and seeing people like walk to the bar to go get a drink instead of watching is probably really hard, or like, you know what I mean? Like, I can't even imagine how terrifying that has to be every single time that you do it.
You also just have to build up some like second skin.
Yeah.
You just have to grow a little callous sometimes. I'm not saying that that's the ultimate end all, like it has to be this way. I'm just saying that you will run into some situations where you have to not be so eager to think you're going to get what you want in the music industry, or just in music in general. And it's like that in a lot of different industries, but the music industry is very much so like that. And it can be one of the most cutthroat industries because of that, because it's a lot of times it's not that you're not talented enough or you don't present yourself. It's just sometimes it's by chance. And also a lot of times people need to realize that there's a lot of people out there that have a very good talent and a specific talent, and sometimes they just know how to convey it or portray it louder.
Yeah.
I don't think it has anything to do with a lack of talent. Just how it's presented.
Yeah.
I think the most like grounding moment for me as a musician to witness was not even on stage. I was in the studio, and this was the first time I had been in like a legit studio before, so even that was just weird enough by itself. But I had joined a band with a friend. I was playing lead guitar. He had written all the songs, and my friend was drumming and had invited me to jam with him. And we had gotten to the point, we were a 4-piece, we'd written all these songs. The guy who was leading the band had a specific producer in mind, specific studio. We book all the dates, we're recording the songs. And we get to this one song that, and again, he was so passionate about this project before anyone else was even involved. Like, he had names, themes, he had artwork dreamed up and everything.
Wow.
And we get into the studio, we're recording this one song, and the sound engineer, who is like, I don't know if I think he's like award winning, but you know who I'm talking about. I'm not going to name him, but he's worked with artists in our area that we really like and who are like blowing the fuck up right now.
I think I know who you're talking about.
So I had no business being in this man's studio room, but what was wild to me to hear him say, and is just, I couldn't imagine being on the receiving end of it, was watching the guy I mentioned putting so much time into this song and then having him say to it, how would you feel about taking your part out of the song? And seeing the look on his face, especially the context being that that was the part that we wrote the rest of our parts around. And he was like, this specific part that you wrote to this song, I don't think it works. And I looked at him, and he just went completely just blanche, just lost all the color in his face because he was so like embarrassed by it. And the sound engineer didn't really like, I don't know that he meant anything by it, in like specifically digging at him, and probably didn't know the extent to which he cared specifically about this music. But like, to put it even more in context, like he, the leader of the band, looked up to this engineer for his work on albums that he'd put out and bands he was in. Like, he was a hero of his. That's how much he wanted to work with this guy. And then for him to be like, yeah, your part that all these other musicians wrote this song around doesn't quite work. And it just really solidified for me, like, damn, as good as you think you are and like how much work you put into it, like, somebody out there might not think it works. you know? And to hear it from such a professional standpoint, I was like, oh my God, that's wild.
And you
That's
know,
so scary.
and you know, sound engineers, they are so well expertise, and a lot of times they're right, and sometimes they're wrong. They're more right than wrong. And it just depends on their level of expertise and how long they've been doing it. But I think that's the humility that unfortunately musicians need to understand is that you might have a whole song
Yeah.
fleshed out, an entire theme fleshed out,
And people might not jive with it.
and
Yeah.
people might not jive with it, or the audio engineer will tell you to do something completely different. I had written an EP one time where I thought it was just tight, perfect, and the audio engineer was like, dude, well, first off, we should really redo this entire chorus. And I was like,
You're like, no.
I was
that
like,
was my
this,
favorite
I was like, I was like, this entire chorus that we've been playing on stage,
Yeah.
live. I know it wasn't recorded yet, but we've been playing it on stage for so long.
this for weeks.
Like literally been working on this for fucking ever. And he was like, you need to redo the chorus. I'm telling you, this song's gonna get nowhere without the chorus being redone.
Yeah.
And I was like, cool. Got
need
it.
a hook, baby.
And he said he wasn't trying to make it sound generic, like it needs that hook. He's like, it needs a good hook.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that he was trying to say I was a bad musician. At the time, I took it to heart. I was like 18, 19 years old. I took it to heart.
Yeah.
But I had to think about it now, years later. Like, he wasn't trying to call me a bad musician. The older I've gotten, I'm like, damn, looking back at it, I'm like, had I had done what I thought I was gonna do, that shit would have fucking sucked. Like, seriously. Seriously. And like, there's some times where I'm like, oh, I wish I would have done that.
Yeah.
But it's all in the moment. You gotta have that level of humility. You
Yeah.
have to.
And that's what I'm saying about being vulnerable. Like, that's such a vulnerable position you're putting in yourself in time
Yeah.
after time after
Yeah.
time again.
I feel like, especially as I've matured and like been around it a long time, worked with a bunch of different people, the biggest thing to me to see is people's reactions to moments like that.
Yeah.
And especially the thing I've tried to work on the most with me is like, because like I talked about, finding it in the room.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't always happen, but when it does, it's great. But then I've come to bands with fully demoed out, like 2 whole guitar tracks, bass, drums demoed out, whatever. And it's like, I try to come with the mindset of like, I know you guys are going to change this. So like,
Yeah.
do it better than I did. But this is the direction that I went in. And I love that level of preparation, but you have to be prepared for somebody to be like, why don't we change this? Or this doesn't really work based on everything that they've ever worked on,
Yeah.
And I think what Josh said is really important too, is thinking about the people you've worked with and their experience
Yeah.
and what direction they see for where your music is going. Because I've worked with producers who my vision of their role in it has changed so drastically from when I was an immature young musician who was just like, oh, they just record it. It's whatever.
Yeah.
And then you start understanding the art form in and of itself of producing a record, because that's the person in the room who can take a good song and then make it great, or make a great song into a hit.
Yeah.
Because you don't always get there by yourself. And frankly, probably more often than not, it's them pushing you that extra however much percent to get that song that makes you, that well known.
Yeah.
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 Absolutely.
Yep. I agree.
So, a question that I have for you guys that I'm sure a lot of other musicians are probably wondering, or maybe you guys have never even thought about this yourself, but do you have any advice for musicians of finding like a balancing act between music and like their personal life, or like music and their job, or whatever, or even finding like a balancing act in a band and having to deal with like so many different personalities and things to do? And
Just depends on the kind of person you are. I mean, if you can make music a full-time gig, then the balancing act doesn't even matter. And I mean, if you make sometimes this happens very often when musicians have one solid project that becomes very big, they end up just branching out to other musicians and performing in other bands and being artists in other projects. And a lot of times they don't even play the same instrument. They do a completely segmented thing, something different in the band. So it just depends on the kind of person you are that you will end up having to do that balance. When it comes to like other musicians that have to work a regular 9 to 5 and have to do like, a lot of times Will and myself, like me, it feels almost impossible balancing music sometimes, but I make it work when I'm that passionate about it. I work, I'm in school full time, and I play in, 2 different projects, and it's, it's a lot, but it's fun. It's fun. It's great. I love it, and you're going to love it when you're passionate about it. That's just it.
I would say the biggest advice is just, because I guess it depends. Like, I have a much more realistic prioritization of it now that I'm in my 30s, and I feel like I've found this about a lot of hobbies that I've been in, is I get to a point, like a tipping point, basically, where I'm like, I'm all about this thing until I have an experience with people who are like really all about this thing, and then I'm like, okay, I'm kind of a casual amount of about this thing.
Of all this thing, yeah.
My biggest thing was like, so I'm a huge Star Wars fan.
Yeah.
When I went to a Star Wars celebration for the first time, I was like, I am not that big of a Star Wars fan. Like, there's no level of Star Wars fan that I could be that would compare to your average Star Wars celebration goer, other than me,
Right.
going for literally the first time. So, like, I've met musicians who, like, it's their whole life. And, like, I've met, touring musicians that I've talked to, like, I had friends in a band when I was in high school and college who were playing like 150 to 200 shows a year for like a couple years. And I would ask them like how they do it, and they're like, I don't know, man. Like, it's just, you make it your everything. And then, I mean, as far as I know, they tried their best to maintain personal relationships, but if you're gone for the better part of half of a year, it really puts it in perspective. I think that was one of the moments where, and that was me going on a leg of their tour that was like, I think the whole summer and then some. And we were on like a week of it. And by the end of the week, we're like, this is fucking exhausting. And here they are. They're like, yeah, this is just one tour out of like however many that got them to that 150 to 200 or so show a year thing. And I mean, the most exhausting part about it is because there's that, kind of glamorous thing of like, oh, we get to do this every day. And it's like, not every day though. Like, some days you're strictly just driving and going to like shitty rest stop bathrooms and just all the hurry up and wait. Some days you've got no money and you're not seeing your friends or your family, and like,
That actually leads me into my last question, which
Yeah.
is, what is tour actually like for you? I just want you guys to tell the internet, because
I
I've
mean,
been on tour and it's a lot
tour-
different than I would have expected.
Tour is different
in our
depending on
meager
circumstance.
experience.
Like
But-
our meager experience is like the DIY style of tour, where you're in a van, packed ass van. Maybe
We were in
even
a cargo
trailer,
van
a
specifically.
cargo van. Whereas for other artists that are a little more polished, maybe not like super in the headlines, but big enough to where they're signed by like a really nice label or a major label, they get to have a bigger vehicle with trailers or a bus, and then they're offered like per diem or specific things, or they have management. For us, we didn't have management, all DIY. We were handling all of our own merch. We were our own merch people. At times, select friends would help, but tour, though, it really looks like not very good quality sleep, maybe not showering, and maybe showering if you get a hotel, and maybe some weird rest stop shit, and
Not great
running
food
into
either.
not great.
not wonderful, not a balanced diet by any means.
No.
Not a balanced diet. If you have dietary restrictions, it's rough. If it's just rough all around, you have to be prepared more logistically than just a normal show. You have to have all rounds of equipment. You have to have clothes. You have to have your major essentials that you would use to live on a regular basis. You don't have to bring your whole house with you, but the things you need. If you're a person who needs medication, damn straight you need to make sure you have your medication on you.
Yeah.
Even if it's for a week or even if it's for a month. Like, holy shit, you're going to need to make sure you have that. But tour is that. And for us, I mean, it was fun. It was really fun. We got to meet a lot of really great people. And I mean, the last thing I'll leave on that note, in the topic of conversation of like missing out on friends and missing out on family and everything like that, if you want to have a successful touring life and a successful interpersonal relationship style life, being a musician or being someone who travels or is on the road, you need to get comfortable with learning how to make friends if you ever want to stop self-isolating on the road, because you will be amazed at how many friends you can make in other states, across the country, even across the world for some people, just by communicating via travel. And musicians need to get more comfortable on being on platforms like even like Discord and stuff like that, because you can just meet people across the world without having to leave your house. When I started out in early bands, it was very easy for us to be in Facebook groups where we had like-mindedness and musicians or inspired by artists that were of the same taste and quality of sound. And it was very easy for us to make friends with these people who ended up being from the UK, and they're like, yeah, if your band ever makes it big and you guys ever want to play in the UK, we know the booking agency. And I'm like, holy shit, like, thank you. And this was like early 2010s where it like almost felt impossible, but it felt possible. So, you know, that is what tour is. That is really, I mean, it does change. I don't want to say that that's the cutthroat blank statement of it, but that's what it feels like.
Oh, yeah.
At least.
That's definitely the harsh side of it, but it is also, you know, seeing places you otherwise probably never would have with your friends, and like bringing the art that you made with them to other people, and if they like it, like that's the best feeling in the world. Like,
It is.
it's kind of corny, but like sometimes hearing oh man, that was a sick set is like the height of my day.
Yeah,
You know?
like the set that Will and I have got, like the tour that we went on, that we got to play in Tennessee and North Carolina and Virginia. And North Carolina was great, but the shows that we got to play in Tennessee and Virginia together, where you and I just got to play the guitar, people were fucking losing their minds to us, and like you and I just got to see that and witness that, and like even like just the other members of the band just having so much fun and watching people move to songs that we created was just such a, you get to do it with the homies, and it's like, it's such a great, that's the better end of tour, is just being able to do that with your friends and leaving your usual scene. It's scary. It feels like a weird leap of faith, but it's so fun. It's so rewarding. It's whether there's pros and cons to it, I don't care. It's more rewarding than it is not rewarding.
Wow. Do you guys have any final thoughts? Any like common misconceptions you guys want to clear up? Maybe.
I think you're gonna meet a lot of people in this scene and in this industry, and I think the big major key point I want to make is to not be easily persuaded, and take everything with a grain of salt. A lot of times when it comes to, you know, booking shows, like not every venue and not every booking agency is going to get back to you by any means. They might be oversaturated, and you need to not get discouraged or be insecure about that, because sometimes it'll come when it comes. And I think that you need to have a big level of patience and just trust the process. I hate to sound so generic, like seriously sound so generic with it, but like there are times where we thought to ourselves, how the hell are we going to write like 10 songs in like a certain period of time? And then we just did it. And it just seemed, it came organically, but it was when we stopped thinking about it so hard and just trusted the process that it was going to happen. Seriously.
I think the biggest thing for like all you youngins out there is just like go to shows. Even if you're not playing in the band, go hang out, have fun, make friends. If you are musically inclined, make music with your friends, because it's cool and fun.
It's so fun.
And it leads to cool stuff. Sometimes no, but most of the time, yeah.
and if you're already very imaginative with your friends on its own, imagine what you could do in music. That's the landscape for imagination. So just roll with it. Imagination. That's all I gotta say.
All right. Talk to you soon on the next URL versus IRL. you guys dancing to the outro music is gonna be real on its own.